The following presentation is based on a live recording of a SOLIDWORKS User Group session covering several strategies for creating CAD models more quickly and with more flexibility to account for potential design changes. Now, this presentation was originally designed to help SOLIDWORKS users understand and compete in the Model Mania design competition, which is held each year at 3D Experience World. But the strategies and advice provided in this session can be applied to essentially any CAD program for faster and more flexible models. So even if you're not a SOLIDWORKS user, you might still be interested. And additionally, the format used for the Model Mania design competition is nearly identical to what you'll find in the SOLIDWORKS certification program. So whether you're looking to compete in the next Model Mania or get your first SOLIDWORKS certification, or if you just want to discover some better modeling practices in general, stick around while we cover the most important strategies, pro tips, and traps to avoid for better designs. And if you'd like to put these techniques to the test, be sure to check out our 3D Model Mayhem exercises for some hands-on practice. All right, thank you guys for being here. We're going to jump right into it. Today's session is on Model Mania. For those of you who don't know, I know there's a lot of familiar faces in the crowd today, so I have a feeling everyone here is familiar with Model Mania. Is anyone not familiar with Model Mania? Okay, so this is hopefully going to be your comprehensive guide to what I would consider to be the most prestigious SOLIDWORKS speed modeling competition in the world. So I'm really excited for this session. We've got some interesting stuff to cover today. But before we get started, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Jacob Ames. I'm a content evangelist and subject matter expert at Solid Professor. And prior to that, I worked in the reseller channel for Hawkridge Systems. So I've been using SOLIDWORKS for over 10 years now. I also did a lot of work with technical communications products, which are SOLIDWORKS Visualize, Composer, Inspection. I worked with DraftSight and DriveWorks. And I also have done a lot of video production. So that's primarily what I focus on now. With Solid Professor, I create a lot of our engineering and design curriculum, specifically for SOLIDWORKS, but we do support other CAD platforms as well. And I really enjoy it so far. Based out of Olympia, Washington, which when I'm out of state, I just say Seattle, Washington, but you guys know where Olympia is. We're in the right spot for that. If I'm not creating videos or lessons of some sort, you can find me breaking a motorcycle or fixing a motorcycle typically. I love video games. I'm about 50 hours into Valheim right now, and I also picked up geocaching a couple years ago. And my goal by the time I'm 50 is to have one in all 50 states. So I'm at 8 right now. As far as work goes, I got an elite applications engineer. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it means I've taken a lot of certifications and I did a lot of work with SOLIDWORKS. I'm CSWE certified, so that's the expert level. And my biggest personal achievement just last year, I crossed the 1 million YouTube view threshold for SOLIDWORKS content. That's what makes it impressive, I think, is that it's SOLIDWORKS content we managed to do that with. So really proud of that one. And yeah, let's go ahead and get right into it. So agenda for today, I want to talk about the rules and fundamentals for Model Mania and how the competition works. Now, even if you have no intention of doing the Model Mania competition, the skills and techniques that we're going to cover today translate really well to every aspect of modeling in SOLIDWORKS. You need to be quick, you need to be accurate, you need to have good design intent. We'll elaborate more on all of that here in just a minute, but again, even if you don't intend to do the competition, these are still good skills to work on. We'll talk about some winning strategies. There are 2 phases to the competition, and the approach varies a little bit. So we'll talk about what to prioritize in phase 1 versus phase 2, and what those phases entail. And we will provide a walkthrough and a design review. So we're going to take 2 different approaches to phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, we're going to actually build from scratch, and we're going to cover the design process for a winning model. We actually managed to pull off a win last year in the reseller category for 2025 with a time of 12:53. And then phase 2, where we need to make some changes to the designs, we'll be covering, similar to what Eric did in his presentation today, we'll be rolling back a completed model and seeing what the design choices and decisions looked like. Finally, we'll wrap up with some pro tips, some additional stuff that I think everybody should know for Model Mania. We'll talk about some traps that users often fall into and some additional learning resources so you can get some reps in. There's a lot of resources at the SOLIDWORKS website certifications are a really helpful way to get prepared for this, and vice versa. And we also have a lot of resources at Solid Professor as well. Any questions before we get started? Okay, I do have a short video. We actually announced just last week that Solid Professor is sponsoring the Model Mania competition at 3D Experience World this year. So this was that announcement video, and it covers a few of the basic details. So we can get that out of the way and talk about the more interesting stuff. Honor, prestige, and a $500 gift card for first place. 3D Experience World 2026 is right around the corner, and Solid Professor is excited to announce that we've partnered with SOLIDWORKS this year to host the legendary Model Mania Design Challenge. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Model Mania is the premier modeling competition for designers, engineers, students, or really anyone looking to put their SOLIDWORKS modeling skills to the test under the pressure of a ticking clock. It's one of the most prestigious events in the world of CAD, and last year we took home one of the gold medals. For the competition, you'll receive a 2D drawing and then model it in SOLIDWORKS as a 3D part. Then you can expect to make some design changes, but there's a catch. You don't get to know what the design changes will be until you're done with the first phase of part modeling. And once complete, you'll submit the mass of the part as your answer, and if you're both correct and quick enough, you might just be in the running for some pretty substantial prizes. Now, this will be Model Mania's 27th year running at 3D Experience World. And over the years, thousands of aspiring and veteran SOLIDWORKS users alike have tested their might in this competition. If you've participated in the past, you already know just how challenging it really is to work under pressure like this. But if you're new to the game or shooting for a spot on the podium this year, you're going to want some practice, and Solid Professor has you covered. Our 3D Model Mayhem series has over 100 design challenges to get you ready for Model Mania. These exercises are formatted to look nearly identical to what you'll see in the competition. And it's no coincidence that they're also very similar to what you can expect to see on SOLIDWORKS certification exams. We've got exercises from beginner to expert level, so no matter your experience or skill, you can still take advantage of them. For more information on the history of Model Mania and solutions to competitions from previous years, take a look at the SOLIDWORKS tech blog titled 26 Years of Model Mania, and be on the lookout for another video from Solid Professor breaking down the decisions and strategies of our winning solution from 2025. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the competition. Let's get into the rules and fundamentals. As far as the logistics of the competition, phase one, you are presented with a design you've never seen before in the format of a two-dimensional drawing, and from that you need to construct the 3D model. You'll then save a copy of that phase one file, that's phase one, and then you'll request the phase two drawing, at which point you'll receive another drawing, and this one comes with design changes. You then have to modify your completed phase one model and report the mass of the model. That is your answer. That's how we tell if the answer is correct. And as if you are fast enough and you have the correct answer, you can place and win some prizes and prestige. So this is the basics of it, but the details get a little bit more technical. So the competition is set up with a row of booths that are covered with curtains so you can't see in, and to protect the integrity of the competition. And you are given a default install of SOLIDWORKS. This is an important detail. If you are somebody who uses heavy customizations, if you use mouse gesture wheels with 8 gestures on them, if you have elaborate shortcuts, or if you're used to elaborate equipment like a space mouse, for example, you're not getting any of that. So this is all very default. It's just SOLIDWORKS. In addition, you get a 2-minute grace period to review the drawing. This is extremely important. This is where you set yourself up for success. As Russell Wilson said, the separation is in the preparation, and you've got 120 seconds to do that with your grace period. There is a time limit. In my opinion, the time limit's kind of arbitrary. People ask me this about Model Mania, what's the time limit? If you have to ask, you're probably not in contention to place. I don't even know what the time limit is. I think it's 30 minutes. But is it 20? Thank you, Eric. So time limit of 20 minutes, but you got to finish quicker than that. Usually the winning times are somewhere between probably 8 and 15 minutes. So there is a time limit. And the judging criteria, accuracy first. You're not going to get credit if you don't get the correct answer, so that has to come first. And there are 2 divisions as well. So sorry, back up a second. Accuracy first, then speed. And there are 2 divisions, professional, which is essentially everyone. That one's open to everyone who works with SOLIDWORKS commercially, or anyone else who wants to join. And this year, my understanding for 2026 is they're introducing a student track. I have not confirmed this yet, but in previous years, it was a reseller track for companies who sell SOLIDWORKS. There has been discussion of replacing that with a student track, which I think is really cool because resellers will still be able to participate in the professional track, but that is to be confirmed. So you participate in one of those, and the top 3 times with the correct answer will place and receive a prize. And those prizes are pretty cool. Last year we had a $500 gift card for first place. Now, new for 2026, this just was announced today, as far as I know. This appeared on my LinkedIn feed today, so I created a slide for it. You're nodding your head. You didn't know about this?
Today.
Yeah, so probably 6 hours ago, 7 hours ago, I saw this. New for 2026, we have an online Model Mania challenge that's taking place very shortly, actually, in about a week. It's January 21st at 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. It's the exact same concept, but everybody's going to be participating in the competition simultaneously. So the drawing will be revealed on the SOLIDWORKS YouTube channel, and apparently you can also use XDesign if you'd like. There's no restriction on which platform you use. I assume maybe you could do this on even a non-SOLIDWORKS platform, but SOLIDWORKS or XDesign, and all participants compete at the same time, and the prize is a CSWA exam voucher and to be featured on their YouTube channel. So pretty cool, but that's in preparation for the main event, which is at 3D Experience World. So it's really good practice for that if you're intending on participating. One other thing I'd like to add is that Model Mania is complementary to certifications. The process is very, very similar. There's tons of similarity between what you would do in the Model Mania competition and what you would do in a SOLIDWORKS certification. There's hands-on 3D modeling of a 2D drawing. That process is the same. There's a time limit. You use the mass to validate your answer, and there are design changes that are required. So it's all very, very similar. If you get really good at Model Mania and these types of exercises, you're very likely going to do very well in the certification exams, and vice versa. If you have a lot of certifications already, you're probably more prepared than you realize to participate in Model Mania. The competition level, in my opinion at least, is roughly CSWP. It does vary from year to year. I think 2025 was probably a little bit easier than what you might see in the professional exam. Sometimes it's a little bit harder, but that is a good estimate for the level of difficulty you can expect. And by the way, if you're trying to get trained up to get on the podium this year, we do have additional resources for advanced and expert level certifications as well. So whether you're training for Model Mania or trying to get your certified SOLIDWORKS expert, we have a bunch of exercises at Solid Professor that are very similar to what you're going to see here and in the competition. Now let's talk about winning strategies. You got to finish quickly and accurately. So you're trying to strike a balance. This is the way I see it, at least. You're trying to strike a balance between being accurate, being fast, and maintaining flexibility. Accuracy, of course, you have to get the correct answer, but to win, you also have to do it quickly. And then there's this third element, flexibility. Specifically in phase 1, you have to design in such a way that when the design changes come with phase 2, you can make those edits quickly and efficiently without backing yourself into a corner or having to delete a bunch of features, so on and so forth. So combining all of these will give you a shot at winning. Now, general strategy. This applies to both phases. You want to start with some sort of a plan. You don't want to go in blind. That's where the grace period comes in. You want to use that full 2 minutes to your advantage. And you want to try to balance all 3 of these elements roughly equally. You want to study the drawing during your grace period, and one of the things I like to look for is where are the biggest dimensions, because oftentimes the biggest dimensions will describe the base feature that you should start with. This is not always going to be the case, but oftentimes the larger dimensions represent where you want to start. You also want to determine which view, front, top, or right, is going to allow you to capture the most design intent at one time with a single feature. And making a good decision for the first feature is oftentimes will determine whether you're going to win or lose. Because again, if you back yourself into a corner, it's going to be very difficult to recover from that if you start with a sketch in the wrong view. Also pay attention to the section views. I feel like this especially applies to newer users. They maybe don't know how to read section views or don't understand how the cuts work, but you have to understand what the section views represent, what perspective you're looking at, and also what information is contained in them. Oftentimes when you have internal pockets, the depth of those pockets will be represented with section views, and there's usually important information that's tied into them. And then of course, what is the best feature order? There's a million ways to develop any part. You want to really take a moment to think about what the best and most optimized feature order is. And by the time you even open SOLIDWORKS in the competition, hopefully you have the first 3 or 4 features already planned out. Okay? Again, accuracy comes before speed. I'll keep reiterating this. And the question that I'll ask myself when I'm looking at the drawing, in addition to everything else on this screen, is where can I save time without sacrificing or risking accuracy? So things like symmetry, extremely popular in Model Mania. You're always, I won't say always, but almost always going to have a mirror feature or some sort of symmetry built in that can save you a substantial amount of time. So be looking for those types of things. Also, contour selection or nested contours. Where can you combine sketches so that you don't have to constantly switch context and go into and out of a sketch and into and out of another sketch? Those are 2 of the biggest things that I see as advantages to winning a competition like this. So that's general strategy, applies pretty much across the board. Phase 1, make as much of the model as you can in one feature. We talked about that a bit, but you want to really make that first feature count. Step 2, use or verify all the dimensions on the sheet other than reference dimensions. You may not use every single dimension, and obviously reference dimensions you're probably not going to use, but those are great sanity checks. But you need to be aware of all the dimensions, right? You're probably going to use all of them. They will be included in one way or another. And establish intelligent design intent that's easy to change. Remember, this is phase 1. Changes are coming, but you don't know what they are. So you have to try to anticipate what changes might be coming in phase 2. Even though you don't know, you want to build your design to be receptive to those changes. So that means avoiding things like blind end conditions, direct editing features, things that tend to back you into a corner that some of you are probably familiar with. I will also add one additional note here. When you look at a drawing, just because a dimension is associated with one certain view doesn't mean that's where you have to sketch it. I think this trips up new users too. You may see a dimension that is illustrated or represented on the right view, but when you're sketching it, you can include it on the front view to make things more efficient for you. And that's something worth keeping in mind here. Okay, let's move on to phase 2. Again, you want to take a moment to understand the required changes. I don't believe there's a grace period for phase 2. My memory is failing me. There is no grace period for phase 2. Right, clock's ticking, you're already good, just wanted to confirm that. No grace period for phase 2. I still recommend taking a solid moment to digest what's in front of you, because the more time you prepare, the faster you're going to be able to work. Look for the revision clouds. The changes are illustrated right there for you, but as soon as that phase 2 drawing is set in front of you, all of a sudden you forget what you're supposed to be looking at and what your name is and everything else. So look for those revision clouds. And this third point, I want to be clear on this. When I say design flexibility goes out the window, this does not mean that you should let your modeling strategy get sloppy, but it does mean that you can safely use features that are less flexible, like those blind end conditions. Because you know there's no additional changes coming, you can use the quick and dirty methods that we do not recommend for phase 2. But the plan of attack is ultimately the same. even though you can incorporate additional features, you want to look for where you'll be needing to edit existing features versus creating new features. Do you need to remove or reorder features or roll back? Do you need to edit sketches? And also, you'll likely notice in the phase 2 drawing that there's going to be a note that illustrates multiple places. So it'll say 4 places, for example, in our phase 2 drawing here. That means those features are going to be identical, or those dimensions are identical across multiple features in the part. So those can be really useful. Any questions before we move on to the walkthrough? Now, as I mentioned, we're going to approach phase 1 and phase 2 a little bit differently. Phase 1 is going to be a walkthrough from scratch, and I would love for this to be interactive. If you guys have questions, if you have recommendations, we've got a lot of experts in this room, so please feel free to contribute if you have some expertise that you would like to add. I would also like to point out that this is my solution. This is not the only solution. After reviewing this, I don't even think it's the best solution, but it happened to win last year. That's all I can say about it. So it got the job done. Use the printouts to follow along if you would like. The solution is 2691.85, and that is in grams. So first things first, what is the first step? What stands out to you? One of the things that I will often do is just a quick gut check, and whatever view is the busiest or has the most detail is oftentimes the place to start. Imagine starting with the top view. What are we sketching? Probably a rectangle with a hole in the center, and we extrude that and we get a block, and there's not really a lot going on there, and there's a bunch of stuff that we would have to do. It's just messy. Same thing with either of the section views. The only real answer here is the front view. We can capture this slot profile, we can capture the circles, which, as you can probably see, are equal size, so that's something I'm keeping in mind. The contour of the internal pocket is also covered here. And I'd also like to point out, I mentioned this a bit earlier, but all of these 10 millimeter dimensions, the 50s and the 150, 10s here and here, even though those are represented in different drawing views, all of them can be utilized in this front view. That's going to save us a lot of time as well. Now, in addition to this, we have symmetry. Symmetry is a tricky one. Symmetry, in my experience, always shows up in Model Mania, but you want to be careful how you use it, because you can set yourself up to, again, back yourself into a corner. And there's some cases where sketching, say, a quarter or a half, and then performing a mirror can actually be slower than some of our other tools. So think about that as we get into this walkthrough. It'll make sense here in just a minute. But we have a ton of symmetry in this model. We have top and bottom symmetry, we have left and right symmetry, we have symmetry across the extrusion plane. And those are all things that we want to be thinking about, even if we don't maybe know exactly how we're going to use this right away. Okay? So let's go ahead and jump over to SOLIDWORKS. And like I said, we're going to be starting this from scratch. So I've got a blank file for you here. And again, we're starting with that front view. So we'll begin with a sketch on the front view, and the comment that I made about symmetry is going to come up right away. I could set up some center lines, and I could sketch even a quarter of that front profile, and then I could mirror it across top, bottom, left to right. But we have this command right here that's a center point slot that does exactly that. Why not? Even though symmetry and mirroring comes up a lot, don't feel like you have to use it if there's a faster way. We also conveniently have the ability to add dimensions with a checkbox right here, and we can do that either center to center or end to end for the arcs. And that end to end is going to match up the dimensions that we have right here. We're combining a dimension from the top view, that 150, and we're adding that in to the front view. So I'll just start at the origin, come out. This is the center line, so we're not adding any dimensions to this just yet. But when I go to place this, here I have a dimension that I can add. Anybody see anything wrong with this picture? Something is horribly wrong right now. I know it's kind of small on the screen. Look at my units. I'm about to completely ruin my chances at winning right now by making this 50 inches tall. Yeah, so that's the first thing that I want to mention. Yep. Before all else, and this is going to come up again in the traps section, check your units. Always check your units. I think the default templates probably are in millimeters, but I always emphasize this. We are in millimeters. Anything else that stands out here that is going to cause me to fail? Material. You've participated before, haven't you? It is so sad to lose because you forget to select a material. Now, question for you guys. Do you know what density is used when a material is not selected? Water. Kind of an interesting little fact there, but we're using plain carbon steel for this example. Our units are set, our materials set. Let's go back and sketch that out again. So that's the first thing I always recommend doing. Now, if you are wondering why I'm able to input these dimensions, there's a setting for that I'm going to share in just a moment. But we're very quickly just going to verify these dimensions, update them, and this is our slot profile. I'm going to come back to this in just a moment, but the ability to input those dimensions is called on-screen numeric input, and this is not a default setting. So this is really up to you and how you're comfortable modeling, but I would recommend jumping into settings as a first step, along with setting your units and setting your material, and you can search for numeric, and there's a sketch option here, enable on-screen numeric input on entity creation. If you enable that, you can key in dimensions while sketching, and over the course of the 10 minutes, let's say, that it takes you to complete the model, jumping in here and enabling this can pay for itself. That way you're not constantly activating the dimension command. So this was already on my system, but I just wanted to add that. You'll find that on the cheat sheet there as well. Okay, back in our main sketch, I'm going to take advantage of nested contours. Again, we don't need to create the slot and then the holes and then the pocket. We can do all of those in one singular sketch. I'm also going to be using a mouse gesture here to just hold the right mouse button down and slide over to a circle. I'm going to input my 40 millimeter dimension, and I'm going to create another circle right next to it. And thinking about design intent, I find it very unlikely that if the model changes, these two circular contours will change independently. They're probably going to stay tied to one another. So instead of dimensioning that separately, I'm just going to control select them and add an equal relation. Next up, we have our internal contour. And if we take a look closely, these are all controlled by offset dimensions. They're all offset by 10 millimeters. And that's what creates that internal pocket contour. So with both the circles selected, I'll use the offset entities command. This is another game changer. That's on the sheet as well. Offset entities, extremely common. Offset those 10 millimeters to the outside. And then you can trim this away. If it starts to get too busy, you can use the trim tool ahead of time, or you can save it to the end. You just want to make sure you understand what's going on. I'm going to save that to the end. Use a hotkey with L, which is the default key for the line command. You could also use a mouse gesture if you prefer, and just add a couple lines in here. Now, these need to be symmetric. Add in a quick symmetric relation with respect to the center line, which is another convenient aspect of the slot. And then we're just going to create our offset dimension manually here. And that used an offset value of 10, just like the circles. So I know it looks like there's a lot going on, but we can use trim entities with the power trim mode on and just clean this up a bit. And there you go. So this is our finished contour, and this is going to generate like 90% of everything we need. But if you're not familiar with contour selection, you may not know how to utilize this to its maximum potential. So when I go to features here, say I have sketch 2 selected in the tree, or if I was still active in the sketch and went straight to an extruded boss, notice it creates this hole in the center. These pockets are a 20 millimeter offset from the outside surface, so this isn't going to work for us. What do? The selected contours section allows you to specify which regions and which contours are included in this boss extrude. So just like that, I'm including the circular contours as through holes, but I can come back and reuse the pocket contour for a separate feature. I would also recommend a mid-plane end condition here, and what this will do is when we input our depth of 100, it keeps this symmetric for us, so when we use a mirror feature, for example, that's going to be coming up shortly, we're able to use the default front plane to do that. So again, saving ourselves some time here. Now that sketch disappears, but you can always bring it back. I just expand the boss extrude, show the sketch, and by pre-selecting this internal contour, when I choose to create a cut extrude, it goes straight to using just that contour. So we're reusing the same information. I only have one sketch to deal with. It's beautiful. Now this does, unfortunately, start in the center of our model, but that's an easy fix if you are familiar with from conditions. We can control where this feature begins as well as where it ends. So instead of starting on the plane on which it's sketched, I can change the from condition to surface, face, or plane and specify I would like the feature to start here on the front. And then using our 20 millimeter dimension, I can just do a blind cut toward the center, and there you go. There's your internal pocket. At this point, I can hide the sketch. You don't even have to hide the sketch, but just visually it's easier to deal with. And what do you suppose is next? Mirror. This is where the mirror comes in. This is nice and easy. Because we use the mid-plane end condition when we go to choose the mirror face, or plane in this case, we can just use the front plane. We don't have to create any additional construction geometry. These are the types of things that can save you 5 seconds here, 10 seconds there, and result in a few minutes at the end of the competition. So there's our mirror face. For features to mirror, cut extrude, and as soon as I click this, we get our first error. You'll see a warning here. If I rotate to the back, nothing has been created. If we hover over this, it says some feature instances are disjoint and will not be created. Now it tells us to use the bodies option. We don't have any bodies. So if you're not familiar with this error, this might be the end of the road for you. But you could always, if you needed to, use the same sketch, create another feature on this face, right? But they wouldn't be linked, right? This could be the first sign of panic. You see the yellow or the red show up and it's over, right? This actually comes down to a pretty common error that we see a lot. It's the geometry pattern checkbox. Have you guys seen this before? Geometry pattern is kind of a magic wand. It essentially prevents the feature instance from trying to use the same from and end conditions as the original, and that, my understanding in this case, is that's the problem because we use the opposite side face as a from condition. It doesn't know how to process that, so we say forget it, just use the geometry and mirror that, and there you go, it's fine now. And we're on the home stretch now. This next one's pretty easy. This is just a through hole. I'll create a separate sketch, again taking advantage of all of my tools here. It's 35 millimeters. And I've got a pretty clever one for this. Instead of going in and starting a new feature, I like to use Instant 3D sometimes. You got to be comfortable with this to do it, but if I just click on this sketch contour, an arrow pops up. If I click and drag it up, it creates a boss. If I click and drag it down all the way through, it creates a hole. Now, I don't know if this is good design intent. I wouldn't recommend this here. If this were phase 2, go for it. But you could always come back to what is now a boss extrude. This is kind of interesting because we created the feature upward first as a solid. It's named a boss extrude, but it's actually a cut. And I could just swap this to through all so that it cuts all the way through no matter what. The problem with the other approach being blind is if for some reason in phase 2 it gets big enough, changes enough, it would not cut all the way through the model. Okay, last but not least, we have some fillets. They all have a radius of 2, all these red ones. And if you see those on the paper there, I'll use the S key, bring up the speed bar, set my radius. Now, I have a couple pieces of advice here. The fastest way to do this is to click one edge, use the selection toolbar that appears, choose all edges, and then deselect the 2 that we're not going to use, which is the edges of the through hole from top to bottom, because every other edge is filleted. So this is far and away the fastest way to do this, because that gives us no room for mistakes. we can't accidentally forget an edge, this would be the fastest. Now, one other recommendation, because there may be situations where you have more than 2 edges you would have to deselect here. If you do have to manually select for fillets, use faces. That's my recommendation, because faces will include all the edges associated with that face, and it's just easier to pick them. And it's more difficult, I should say, to forget something. So I can get an equivalent result by selecting those faces, right, if all else fails.
If memory serves me, I think we can click like the cut extrude feature in the tree, and that should select all the edges as well?
You can. You absolutely can. If you select a feature out of the tree, it will select all the edges associated with that. Yep, so that'd be a pretty clever way to do this too. Could probably do all 3 of those. Now, that does still give me these edges. And the only thing that I would, I guess, warn about this approach is because we're selecting features rather than a series of edges, there's now no way for me to unselect this edge and the bottom edge. But generally speaking, selecting features is a very fast way to select many edges at once.
Yeah, so you can pick the 2 faces and the 2 features, and you've got everything you need.
Yep. I am a big fan of this speed bar though. Just select all edges, it does its thing, deselect the ones you don't want, and you're off to the races. So this is our finished phase 1. We can do a quick mass check here. 2691.85, and that's our solution. Any thoughts or questions on phase 1? It is normal to think it looks really easy when you see it done like this after the fact. It's a lot scarier during the competition.
I got one thought.
Sure.
The fillet preview is always a good indicator, because oftentimes
Yes.
when you're picking, like the preview will disappear.
Yes.
Right? So maybe they're having issues with fillets, so okay.
Yeah, let me see if I can put it into, well, I can do this just by increasing the size of the fillet. So just so everybody can hear, the comment was about the fillet preview. You should always create fillets with the preview on, because like Michael said, if we have too big of a radius, or if we have some combination of edge selections that will not work, you're gonna know. If the preview doesn't show up, you should be scared if you have preview enabled. So always create fillets with the preview enabled, and you can find that right here. Full preview is the mode that you want to use. Okay, oftentimes that's size, but if your size is good, it can be the combination of selections you're using.
What are your thoughts on applying an appearance, like a separate color to the fillet feature?
That is very common. If you're gonna do that, just do it quickly, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess I have mixed feelings on that, because I don't know in the competition that it's necessary, but it is shown on the drawing. So that can be a bit misleading, especially for newer users. Maybe you think that you need to apply that appearance. It can be useful visually, but again, not required to get that correct mass value. So if you're feeling confident, I say skip it. If you think that it will help you maybe in phase 2 or just give you that peace of mind, if you want to check your fillet blends, which is somewhere that things often do go wrong, and the reason that people will often fail these is because fillets blend poorly, you may want to apply that just to take a close look. I would say it depends on your level of confidence. All right, let's take a look at phase 2 here. So phase 2, again, once you get the phase 2 drawing, you need to be thinking, where are we going to be editing existing features? Where are we going to be creating new features? Are we going to be removing or reordering features, maybe using the rollback bar, adjusting existing sketches, and looking for these indicators of multiple places? And if you look at that phase 2 drawing, you will see one. But if you look at the section view at the bottom, you'll see 40 TYP, and then 4 places. You'll also see R20 TYP, 4 places. This indicates that those dimensions are identical for all 4 of the hook features. That also indicates that we can probably use symmetry because they're identical. And that's one of the other things that I would look for here as well. So let's investigate this drawing a little bit further. First thing I notice, the fillets. We just added those, but they're going to be in the way. You do not want to cut into existing fillets. You always want to save fillet features for last as long as they're cosmetic, which all these highlighted red ones typically are going to be. There is a fillet feature here that is not cosmetic. We'll get to that shortly. But we're going to have to roll back to get those out of the way. We don't want to try to cut through those and fix them later. So that's the first thing that stands out. The second thing is we have a revision cloud here. We have a new draft feature. 5 degrees of draft inside this internal pocket. Now the question I would pose to you is, does this require a new feature? I see one shaking head. Why not? Can you tell us why?
I can edit the existing pocket and just activate the draft option within it.
That's exactly right. So again, there's a couple approaches to this. You could use a separate draft feature, but in this case, we already have a cut extrude feature. And if you're familiar with the cut extrude, there's a draft option that we could just enable and input this 5 degrees. So already I'm seeing this and thinking, okay, am I going to need to create a new feature? Can I edit an existing feature? How is this going to work? So that should be pretty straightforward. Next up, we have symmetry. Once again, we have top and bottom symmetry. We have left and right symmetry. So we'll be looking for ways to take advantage of that. And then finally, we need to really consider how we approach this, because right here, highlighted in the lower section view, I think this is probably the biggest gotcha of last year, is everybody sees this contour and they think, I could sketch that. Let's go ahead and sketch that on the top plane. There's a bunch of reasons that it doesn't work, but one of the big ones is that the trim that it would create would be parallel to the top plane, which if you look at this section view, that is not the case. That would be incorrect right off the bat. But additionally, we don't have this offset dimension. We have the top plane we could sketch on, but in order for this profile to work, we would need to create an offset plane, and it just gets out of hand very quickly. So you can gut check that if you think about it for a bit and say, this probably doesn't feel right. Instead, the approach we're going to take is we're going to create a cut just like you see here in detail E, that broken out section view. And we're just going to cut all the way up through to the 40 millimeter dimension there that's illustrated as typical in 4 places. Now that does not solve this problem, the arc that we have here. Again, I think that's why it was kind of a gotcha last year, because you have to create this sort of awkward cut and then come back through and create a fillet there. And it is not a cosmetic fillet. Again, that's one, it's going to be near the end, but it is not in the same category as all of these red fillets. It's much more important than those. So there's a lot going on here, but we can do it. Again, for this particular example, we're going to look at a completed model and just work backwards. Very, very, very first thing we would do if we were starting with phase 1 is, like I said, roll back prior to the fillets. So it would look like this. None of the other features would be there, of course, but you would get rid of the fillets and get started there. Now, if we come back to just after cut extrude 2, this is essentially where we left off minus the fillets. Our very first feature is a cut extrude, and this is what I was describing. There's a few different ways that you could handle this, but if you look at the sketch itself is actually pretty straightforward. It's just that pie-shaped wedge at 60 degrees, and then we're going to create an extruded cut. And the cut depth can be approached in a couple ways, because again, this is the Wild West now. This is phase 2. We don't have to really care about design intent. If you look at the cut extrude feature, when I did this, this is kind of a mistake, but it's a very small one. I set an offset from surface end condition and used the 40 millimeter dimension that's specified on the drawing. So it's not a mistake, but I probably could have done it faster if I had set this to blind and done some quick mental math and set 60, because there's one fewer selection I would have to make. I wouldn't have to choose an end condition since blind is the default. Little details like that could shave off a few seconds here or there, but the result is essentially the same. So we create this cut. We're only creating one right now because we're going to be taking advantage of symmetry. Now, you can probably already see because of the feature tree, but in case you can't, especially for those of you in the back, why would I create an axis here? This is one of my favorite pieces to talk about. I've got a thumbs up from Eric. What's going on here?
You're not going to mirror it, you're going to do a circular pattern of it, because mirroring will directly mirror it. There's a circular pattern, we'll rotate it.
That is correct, and that's one of the things that I want to emphasize here is we can use circular patterns despite the model itself not being circular. And the reason for this is I think people probably will default to wanting to mirror this across two planes at once, which is even more confusing because as of last year, 2025, we now have support for multiple planes to mirror across. But if I try to do that, it doesn't result exactly the way we intend. So if I start with the front plane and grab my cut as the feature to mirror, obviously this right off the bat's not correct, but we have this new field for a secondary mirror plane because we're essentially trying to mirror it across the front and the top plane at the same time. But if I include the top plane, now we get this. So it's mirroring the result of the first direction. Even if I mirror the seat only, we're still not getting there. So what the circular pattern does is it rotates around that axis. So I have full control over that. You do have to create the axis. This is actually super easy because of positioning and having the foresight to build this model symmetric with respect to the origin. I can now just intersect the front and the top planes, and boom, we've got an axis. So I love that mode. But if you didn't think of that ahead of time, you would have to create that axis somehow. And then this circular pattern. We rotate the cut around that axis. You could do instant spacing of 180 degrees or equal spacing with two instances. The result is the same. Again, notice geometry pattern option is on. And that's how we get the top and bottom on opposite sides there. And then the next feature is an actual mirror. We can just mirror across the right plane, take advantage of that. Then we got to remove the material in between these two. This is another section where I think you could back yourself into a corner or make a mistake that you don't realize, and that's with the fillet. Because if you do make the connection that we do need to create a fillet feature here, that's great, but if you try to do it now, it's just a little bit off, but it's enough to mess you up. So if I create a 20 millimeter fillet here, which is the radial dimension specified on the drawing, we actually get early termination because of the existing face. If you see stuff like this where you're creating a feature and it stops sooner than it should, this is probably always a bad thing. Maybe I'm speaking too generally there, but when I look at this, I think that's not supposed to be like that. So we have to pay attention to feature order. With that being said, we create a simple cut extrude. I say simple, but the sketch is once again on the right plane. And if we take a look at the feature, this one's pretty clever. This uses an offset from condition. So we talked about from conditions already where we can choose where the feature starts. I just ripped the sketch out real quick and used an up to next end condition. So we basically bring the sketch way to the outside of the model and then tell it to cut back up through the next face. You could do this in a few different ways. You could create a reference plane out in space and do something similar, but you're kind of wasting time if you do that. If we change the offset and we're not far enough, we're going to be cutting from the inside of the model. If I set this to 65, I could reverse the direction and it would actually start from the inside here, or reverse the direction of the cut rather. It's essentially positioning the sketch within the hole. You're going to get the same result. And then we can bring that fillet in after a mirror. So the 20 millimeter fillet comes in after mirroring to the opposite side. Notice now we're blending all the way up into the area where that material was blocking it before. And then last but not least, here we would actually be able to roll forward and bring our old fillets back. Likely it would need some adjustment because there's going to be a lot of additional edges, but using our exact same strategy as before, we could very easily clear all these selections, choose an edge, select all edges, and just like we did, deselect the two edges that are not included, and there you go. That's a fillet for every single edge. So that's our solution. Hopefully, you found something useful in this retrospective. I do have a few remarks I'd like to close with and some resources, but any questions or suggestions, comments on this process? Anybody see anywhere where I could have saved some time that maybe I haven't seen?
I think one thing I always run into when I do a similar method of select all edges, and it's easy to select through face, and also deselect an edge you didn't want to deselect.
That's true. So the comment was on the selecting through faces, which is enabled by default. Do you think it's worth disabling this, or probably just being careful?
Just know that it's on, especially if you're a newer user and you're not aware of that you can do that.
Yeah. So for newer users, this option right here, select through faces, allows you to pick up edges even if other parts of the model are in the way of them. So I will just clear these selections for a moment to illustrate this briefly. Let's find a good one here. Here's a good example.
In that bottom circle.
Yeah.
You could go for that bottom circle, but
Yeah.
you could easily select an edge you don't want to deselect.
Yep, you can see this highlighted edge. My cursor is not on that edge. You don't even have to see the edge in the model. I could get one way back here.
It knows it's there.
Yeah, what's this one?
Yeah.
Right? So that's a good point. You want to look out for that. Make sure you don't deselect an edge you don't mean to, because that is one of the most common reasons of being just off enough with your mass value to get an incorrect answer. Okay, so that's what our solution looks like. To wrap up here, I want to talk about some pro tips and traps. We've covered some of this stuff already, but I just want to reiterate things to be doing to save yourself some time, things to watch out for. So starting with some pro tips, use all those 2 minutes of the grace period. You're going to be tempted after 60 seconds. It feels like a long time. If already kind of get a general idea, use the full 120 seconds. Symmetry is the king of time savings, if you can use it, if there's not a faster way. Like we saw in this example, I think the center point slot is probably faster for me than creating a quarter of that profile and mirroring it and then mirroring it again. So keep those things in mind. But generally speaking, mirroring and symmetry means fewer features to create and place, fewer sketch entities to create. I would also recommend waiting to mirror multiple features at once when possible. Instead of creating a feature and mirroring it and then creating another feature and then mirroring it, you can save the mirror until the end. Circular patterns, as you saw, can be very useful even for non-circular designs in specific scenarios. So look out for opportunities to use those, and combine your interface and keyboard shortcuts. Some people love their keyboard shortcuts. Some people love mouse gestures. We can live in a world with both. I think both deserve to exist. I use a combination of the default keyboard shortcuts and the default mouse gestures to make this work. The S key is also your best friend, but you do need to know what the default commands on those toolbars are. What are the default mouse gestures? What are the default keyboard shortcuts? Do you know? Because if you have a highly customized interface, you're actually at a disadvantage, even though it might make you work faster in your day-to-day. And then,
They will allow you to bring in a flash drive with your settings so that you can load your settings on the machine.
that is
And then they reset it. Yeah, they've done this for years.
really,
Yeah.
that is news to me. So in case that didn't pick it up, I'm just going to reiterate, you are allowed to bring a flash drive, you said, with your own custom settings wizard
Yep.
to essentially install all of your customizations. Wow, that's a pro tip for sure. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. I may have to do that next year. Well, I say that, but because of all the time I spent in the reseller channel, I use all default stuff. But that's a really good piece of advice. Also, Instant 3D. This is something, admittedly, I underutilize, but I think Instant 3D has the ability to save you some time if it's used correctly. So check that out. And always save your fillet features for last. Those are the ones highlighted in the drawing I'm referring to. Those are cosmetic fillets. All they're going to do is get in the way if you try to move them further, and they will mess you up. They will bite you. Speaking of biting you, here's some traps to look out for. You saw this today. Don't use the wrong units. Always assign the correct material, and do those things before you do anything else. Because if you make your design 50 inches instead of 50 millimeters, you have no chance, unfortunately. That's a very sad way to get the wrong answer. Bad fillet selections or blends, we hit on this a bit today. Be careful with your edge selections, especially if you're using select through faces, things like that. It's very easy to select the wrong edge or forget an edge. And sometimes, especially if you have to have multiple fillet features, if you get the order wrong, if you create small fillets before large fillets, you can get weird blending conditions that will throw off your mass. Missed sketch relations. When you're sketching, especially look out for tangency. I've seen this one a lot where things will look tangent, but they're just not tangent enough. They don't actually have the relation. And so that can throw off your mass too. Underdefined sketches. Your sketches shouldn't be underdefined. If your sketch is underdefined, something has gone wrong. Now, maybe you can still stumble your way into the correct answer, but things are going to blow up in phase 2. Everything should be fully defined. And forgetting to use rollback or read ordering features in phase 2. The only solution beyond that is to just, I guess, delete everything and then recreate it. Obviously, that's going to be quite a bit slower. The last thing I'll add here is geometry pattern. It's an easy setting to forget. So if you run into a situation with a mirror or a pattern feature that fails, that could be why. Top 10 time savers. You've got this sheet in front of you, but I'll just quickly go over them here. Always plan your approach, use the full grace period, and try to identify features and the order in which you would like to create them. Take advantage of that and come up with a plan. Utilize mirror and pattern features anytime they make sense. These are just pure time saves if you can take advantage of them. Offset entities is common in every Model Mania exercise that I've done. They're super common in certifications. Figure out which dimensions on your sheet are offset dimensions. It's usually fairly easy to tell because the leaders will be attached to some other obvious part of the model instead of self-contained. Those can be offset dimensions and you can create those very, very quickly. Then we have numeric input. This one's optional. I love it, and I think if you know where the setting is and you can quickly find it and activate it, or if you bring your own settings that has it enabled, like Eric suggested, turn the setting on and you can key in dimensions while you're sketching, and that will save you a significant amount of time. Utilize the S key shortcut bar. So you're minimizing mouse travel like Francisco suggested. Anytime you can save yourself a few pixels with the mouse, that's time saved too. Contour selection. If you plan to nest your sketches together, you can prevent having to jump into and out of multiple sketches. You can share the same sketch between multiple features, and it gives you a lot of good design intent and flexibility when it comes to making changes. You'll have one sketch to edit, and that's all you'll have to deal with, but you need to be confident in your use of the contour selection tool. Fillet face selection. I recommend using faces in general rather than edges. Maybe this one's a bit controversial. Utilize the selection toolbar if you can, where it makes sense to do that. You can get some more efficiency out of that, but using faces over edges is faster and tends to avoid some of those common mistakes. The rollback bar, adding features earlier in the design history without deleting anything. You will need to use this in phase 2 unless you want to delete a bunch of stuff and recreate it, which of course you don't want to do. So use the rollback bar to your advantage. Undo, we all know why undo's here. I think this one goes without saying. It has to be on this sheet. I have my hand hovering over Control-Z basically the entire time. And then mouse gestures. Again, these go hand in hand with the shortcut bar and the hotkeys in general. It's hotkeys for your mouse. So know what's going to be on the mouse gesture wheel. Take advantage of those so you can use both hands at the same time and save yourself some time. Now, when I was putting this list together, my thought process was, I'll include everything that I can think of that's really useful that you wouldn't have to use and you would still be able to complete the model. Now, you could probably argue some of these, but I think for the most part, you could complete Model Mania without using any of these techniques. It would just be really bad. So these are all performance tools that you can use. Last thing I want to wrap up with here is some additional learning and practice. We'll move through this pretty quickly, but check out previous years. This has been going on for, it'll be 27 years now, and we have a history all the way back to 2000 when we ran it for the very first time, and the drawings and solution videos are available for those. There is a blog article that Jen Dirksen has published called 26 Years of Model Mania. Presumably it'll be 27 years of Model Mania, so on and so forth. And she's got all of these drawings and all the solution videos there. So check those out to get some additional reps in. And there's also a collection of solution models from previous years. It's not completely comprehensive, but a lot of these have the actual solution models if you prefer to work backwards. I know sometimes when I have a solution in front of me, it's easier for me to learn. We at Solid Professor also have a 3D Model Mayhem series, which is a legally distinct name, and it's the same thing. One difference is it's conceptually identical. You get a drawing, you create a 3D part, but the difficulty scales. So we have super easy ones if you're brand new. If you're just learning how to read drawings, we have stuff that's easier than CSWA. And we go all the way through advanced exams, CSWP advanced, in preparation for expert level. So we have some that are very, very hard, so they can challenge you even if you're already an expert. So go check that series out if you have not already. I did want to comment quickly on dealing with wrong answers. If you are working with a solution model, if your mass is slightly off, it's probably related to a small detail. Oftentimes these are fillet features, sketch relations, or just getting a dimension wrong. So as an example here, there's our correct solution, 2483.33 grams was the solution we got. If you're missing a single fillet edge, which I know you can't see from there, but there's one fillet edge that's missing, it throws your mass off by 0.21 grams. Yeah, and that may or may not be enough to get you the wrong answer. I think it's like a 1% threshold for the tolerance. Anyway, it's something you want to look out for, and those issues can cascade as well. If it's more than slightly off, A, check your material in units. B, look for missing features that are on the larger side. If you miss the whole feature, for example, it's possible, right? But that's going to be a sizable mass difference. Or if you had no material assigned, there's a huge difference in mass.
You drafted inward instead of outward or something.
Right, right. That is something that I forgot to mention. I forgot to review the pocket feature, but it's just the checkbox with the extrude option on. Other resources. If you are part of Solid Professor and you're either an admin, a manager, or an instructor, you can access the solution models to 3D Model Mayhem, so check those out. There's also certification and practice exams for SolidWorks that SolidWorks provides, and those include the solutions, of course, as well, and training courses for essentials and advanced parts. That's kind of where Model Mania as a competition sort of hits its limit. The other courses are going to be beneficial regardless, but if you've gotten through advanced part modeling, and these courses are offered by Solid Professor, they're offered by SolidWorks resellers, they're offered at My SolidWorks, and if you've gotten through advanced part modeling, you can probably be competitive in Model Mania. So that's going to bring us to the end of today's session. I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you, appreciate that. Any questions or comments to add to this session? Any insights? First of all, who has participated in Model Mania? I should have asked that. So you did as well? Do you have plans to?
Yeah.
No?
I'd have to be where it is.
Well, remember, they're doing online now. They're a week from today. It's going to be online. Nothing to lose. You might as well give it a shot. But yeah, just curious if any thoughts you'd like to share?
Simulation was the only one I thought, because I don't know if it's coming back.
That is a good point.
But if you look at the previous years,
Yes.
there has been
Yeah.
simulation in there running quick. FDA study and
I actually had,
the mass we put in the factor safety.
yeah, I had planned to share some of that, but I know we were a bit short on time. I'm going to just quickly skip back to,
Are your videos that you did years
They're
ago?
they're still up there. Yeah.
Okay.
did you do some solution videos?
I did. So like,
He
what
was
year? It had to have
practicing.
been like 2017 or 2018.
Yeah,
I think.
2017.
2017.
Yeah.
I did a series leading up to World of like going through all the way from 2000 to whichever one. So
Gotcha.
because I think my first Model Mania that I did was, my first World was 2010. So that was the first time I did Model Mania. And then I got third place in 2013.
Sweet.
And third place again in 2015? Which, one thing was crazy about those, which are like other techniques, they don't come up as often, are like move face, or
Yeah,
move
there's a,
body,
Yeah.
there's a
delete
3-4
face.
years where,
Yeah.
where Mark Schneider was big
Move
time
face, what?
into or replace face.
Yes.
That's dirty. Replace face is real
Yeah.
dirty.
Yeah,
Dang.
Oh, it was 2016 was replaced.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
teardrop one.
Yes. Oh, I hated that one.
Because it has that spherical cut in the face
Yes.
on the bottom.
This was my first year participating, and so I remember this one very well. I made it probably 5 minutes in, I think, and just walked out. That was so bad. But yeah, to your point earlier, some of these years, and I don't know, my understanding is that in 2023 they reverted back to basic model changes, but prior to that, I don't know if it goes back all the way to
Well, there's
2016.
worlds that were virtual and Mark ran it
Yep.
online, and it was only like one phase only.
Right, that's
Yeah,
right.
21 and 22 were the virtual ones.
Yeah.
2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, I think all three of those involved a move or delete face or replace face.
Delete phase,
Yeah.
I
His
know that.
solution.
2015.
So there have been some varying levels of difficulty. I know some of these, I think we're looking at phase 2 for all of these, I think, but some of them that look a bit simpler, it's probably because they had a phase 2 that involved a simulation study as opposed to a more complex design change. Like if you look even at 2013, that one looks relatively simple. I may be underestimating it, but
That one you had to do move.
2010 is
You
the
moved-
wicked one where it used to be symmetrical in one phase,
Yes.
and then you gotta skew it and
Yeah.
keep it one thing.
yeah. So there's a lot here for those of you who are interested in getting some reps in and expanding your skill set. If you work through from 2000 to 2025, you're going to have a lot of practice. So, well, thanks everyone. I appreciate it. Hope you all enjoyed, and thank you for attending.
Don't panic in there, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the key.
I remember like, I was much more greener than further years, but like.
For more SOLIDWORKS content, check out the library on Solid Professor for courses covering a variety of subjects, from introduction to advanced modeling and analysis.